Our lady who's giving our program today is Mischa. She is the county archivist for Putnam County in the county library system. She's an anthropologist and archaeologist, and she loves all things old. And she's you can talk to her about anything and she'll tell you all the things she's done. And she's done everything from digs in St. Augustine to tutoring English in Japan. And the best part is she's from Putnam County, went to schools here and everything. So I asked her to do a program about South Putnam, but not about Crescent City, because we kind of know a lot about the history of Crescent City. And so she came back and she got it. You know, it's before Lake Crescent, called Lake Crescent. So her program was before it was Lake Crescent, and I'll leave it at that. Come on, Mischa.
That being said, now, when she asked me to do this, it was for a library group of just general people. I feel like I'm kind of preaching to the professors, or teaching to the preaching to the choir, teaching to the professors, or something like that, because you probably might know this stuff. You know what? Even if you know it and you've heard it, if you just go, oh, every once in a while, you know. So, my pocket. Magic clicky. So like she said, and I hope you guys can see this because it's a very visual thing. But so, hey, so like she said, the name of this is before it was Lake Crescent, and like she said, I used to work for St. Augustine. I was the assistant city archaeologist for St. Augustine, and a lot of my work revolved around maps and looking at old maps, overlaying them over modern maps. And so I have a great affinity for looking at maps. It's the second best thing to digging through dirt is digging through papers. And so whenever people think about the city that we're in or the area that we're at, we do have a lot of photos, you know, even going back pretty far to the 1870s and stuff. So these kinds of things, this is the city that you know today, the city that you're used to looking at. But Crescent City, and well, just this area has been around obviously and inhabited for far, far longer than that. So again, I'm just trying to get people oriented to where we're at. I'm sure you all know, but hey, if anybody at home doesn't know, we'll just so here we are, we're gonna zoom in. And for a lot of these, I'm going to use the river. That's obviously, it's going to be our big reference point. I'm just scribbling it in by hand. And what I wanted to start with was this, this very cool group of maps. And I love these, and it shows, it's a historical document showing how the counties were drawn in over time. And so it kind of starts, you know, back in the 1820s, and you can see we were just kind of, you know, a couple of places. There's the river, and you know, this is about where Lake Crescent is in this area right here. And as it goes through time, it's really interesting. It shows you how they drew in stuff. St. John's was half of the state, you know, and they kept kind of drawing in more and more stuff. You notice Duval goes all the way over to you know, to the inner coast there. And
mosquito town.
for some. I can't imagine why they would call it that. But you see, at this point, we do have a St. John's County, and we're in it in this area. So we're part of St. John's County at that point. Putnam still doesn't exist yet. So now Latchwell's there. Latchwell's growing. It goes all the way down to Tampa. And then at some point, they start drawing in some more stuff down south. They really fill in the Panhandle area there. Yeah, the rest of Florida is just like
Mosquitoes.
yeah, mosquitoes. And we are still considered part of St. John's County until we get to 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. And once we get into the 50s, we now have Putnam County. But you'll notice we're still not in Putnam County because Putnam County stopped at the river. So we were still considered part of St. John's County, anything east of the river. And it wasn't until the 60s where they finally kind of nudged that line over. I'd love to know the politics behind it. I'm sure there was some. And I'm sure you might also know that Putnam County on the north end has also fiddled around some and been in different counties over the years. So just kind of seeing how we kind of started appearing on We're gonna look at a couple of older maps, so we're gonna start, you know, kind of closer to the 1900s and then zip back in time. This is Apthorpe's Florida map. Here we are just kind of zooming in, there's Putnam County.
I've seen these maps. I didn't know if they were just really bad drawers or if the county actually changed shape.
My maps get really good. They get really creative as I go backwards in time. But no, yeah, the county did actually change its shape over the years. And like I said, especially that northwest corner up there, like where Belrose is and stuff, it wiggled back and forth that line a whole lot. So even fairly recently, I lived in the 50s.
It's labeled the Fruitland Peninsula, 1978.
Yeah.
Where's the southern border of the Fruitland Peninsula? We got
The county line,
Yeah, it's
county line.
in this area. Yeah. We're green, we're that green area over there.
Well, Mischa, we talked about it for 35 minutes.
Well, this is 1878, so I mean, it's, you know, it's back, it shows the theme there.
Actual was a.
There you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
There's
a-
a landmark.
Even with the bottom.
That makes-
All of the maps I'm showing you are available at floridamemory.com.
Yeah.
If you don't know what it is, clear your afternoon. It is really fun.
Yeah.
The site has changed a lot, and it's not as friendly or functional as it used to be, but they have the photos and maps and things. They even have folklore and stories and oral histories and stuff. So here's it's called Crescent Lake. I know we tend to call it Lake Crescent around here, but it's Crescent Lake on this map. And then we're gonna go back in time, and I like this map because it's very funny. This is Colton's, Florida. This is 1868, so about 10, 11 years prior to that. We're very easy to see, and here it is, and it is called Duns Lake. Yep, as far as Duns Creek connects Duns Lake, yeah. Yeah, and it's on there, DUNN. So remember that because somebody didn't remember that at some point.
Lord done.
And so just talking about what was going on at that time. So there was a number of people who had ownership of this general area, going up to Duns Creek down south. So I don't necessarily mean Crescent City when I say this area, I mean Fruitland Peninsula kind of area. So, you know, we had George J.F. Clark, 1816. I have names for some of them. Colonel John Broward owned some of it. Lord Adam Gordon, but of course, the name that we know about most of all is John Diamond. He was a coffee planter. Coffee town. I don't think that was a very good crop for the area, but yo. But he was part of a 1765 land grant. And he was given the land between two lakes. So they were a lot more fast and loose with their land descriptions back then.
Which two lakes?
I'm assuming it's probably Lake George, yeah. I know there's definitely land grant maps, but I was not able to look any up in the time that I was being slow. Cary Southeast, this is 1806. It's just after the turn of the century. And you can also see it's actually Cary Southeast and it has East and West Florida on it. You can see it clearly marked with the two different colors there. And here we are again. And there we are. They have forgotten an N, yes. And that persists through the next couple of maps. I don't know why the N was dropped.
And it's called Lake George.
Yeah,
Really? Lake Georgia. Lake Georgia, yeah. And you have Rollstown, which is also not spelled how we spell Rollstown today, because that is not how his name is spelled at all. Yeah, so yes, these guys. What I love most on this map is our beautiful Florida mountain range.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I suppose if you live in Florida, that is considered the mountain. So, you know, you have the Florida mountains.
Big Carrie's mountain business.
Yeah.
Giant mosquitoes and our shaper and stuff. Yeah, you know, I got a really good map later that has some really interesting life. But one thing I do want to point out on this map is Yamasees. And if any of you are familiar with the Native Americans that lived in the area, the Yamasee were one of the tribes that lived in the area. The Yamasee are still around, although the government proclaims them to be completely extinct. They are not. They live in Ocala.
Isn't there a Yamasee, South Carolina?
Oh, I wonder if there is.
I think they came from South Carolina. didn't
They were like a, kind of how the Seminole or what they call it ethnogenic tribe where they were, Yamasee were kind of one of those where they were, what were they? They were Raleigh and something, the remaining Timucua, a few were left. I think they're kind of one of those kind of tribes. So Stockdale, Florida, 1794. We're not on here obviously, but we're in that area, but look,
It's like,
but once more,
it's
one end.
like.
And now it's Lake George again, it's no longer Lake Georgia. So it's interesting to see how things get done on these maps.
Doctors.
And they will, they take.
Doctor's Lake,
Where is that?
that's, yeah, it's on the last map too.
Yeah, Doctor's Lake.
Out in the forest somewhere.
Yeah, see, I don't, this is literally on see Doctor's Lake.
That is on the calendar.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's still, I don't think we,
It's not bad though.
Yeah.
And that's on.
That's up there.
There's a different.
but yeah, and also you'll notice that this is more of a pictorial representation because if any of you have looked at the map, you know that the lake, it doesn't spread out quite that much, yeah, so now we're getting a little bit more abstract.
Well, in 1794, there wasn't much, you know, surveying. knowledge.
Yeah, they did surprisingly well, but like, still, it's obvious that some of it was just like, I don't feel like going around this corner, I assume it looks like this.
Yeah,
Um,
and it doesn't, it seems like sometimes they'll make a mistake and then it's carried on to the next map by somebody else and someone until they fix it.
because maps were often, what they did was, they would, I don't want to say trace, they would copy the map they had before and then visit the areas to see changes or anything. And if they didn't get to visit that area, it didn't get updated or changed or filled in, it was just how it was. Because you can imagine back in this day, making a map was a huge undertaking. Map of Southern British colonies. There we are down there. Yeah, it's a big map, it's a cool map. So here we are again. Rollstown still spelled differently.
Yeah.
You see Matanzas, there's Dunn's Lake. With one N.
Yeah.
And this is only 10 years after Dunn got it, so, and within the 10 years, they just dropped one of the ends on his name.
It wasn't around to. So.
I also like the ones that are just freshwater lakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Freshwater lakes.
And then to move how.
Yeah, the Tomahawk River, which I wonder is actually supposed to be the Timucua River, and named after the Timucua, and they just got a different pronunciation of it.
And then there's. So
yeah.
it's just.
So, yeah, a lot of these got different pronunciations.
Matanza, it's Matanza.
And you'll also notice to the left, we still have our mountain range on the back on this one, so,
Well, it is the high,
still hiking of it.
relatively.
So I'll talk a little about Rollstown, because I love the information I have on him, and it always gives a good laugh. So my favorite horrible people that was in this area. So the caretaker of this collective, while sufficiently rich in the material realm, was amply impoverished in spirit. True to the traits of a megalomaniac, Roll focused on his desires and showed meager concern for the welfare of those he imported from the mother country. This was a White from 1999, writing a paper glowing reviews of him. Clearly had great affection for him. I love this just because of how biting it is, and we might say 1999, looking back in retrospect, yeah, we think he's a terrible person now, but I have some contemporary stuff that's fantastic. So, what you gonna do? Mr. Roll was the most miserable wretch I have ever saw. The few people he brought out have left him. He will be a detriment to the province by taking lands on the St. John's River, which could have been occupied by more useful inhabitants. Governor James Grant.
Hey, buddy.
To his friend Richard Oswald in 1769.
Grant,
There was a lot of contention between them. He was constantly asking for more land, constantly asking for more money, provisions. He had this idea of this perfect utopia, and all you needed was a bunch of indentured and enslaved people to build it on. It'd be great. And everybody seemed to hate this guy and just endured him. I think he was the first Karen. I really do. I think he wanted to speak to life's manager.
For people that he took over, basically got off the boat in St. Augustine.
And no, yeah, they just noped right out. So this is his a map of what he was granted. If I remember, it was I have it wrong right now. It was like 12,000 acres.
It was bad, yeah.
Yeah, and so you'll notice on this, so just to put it into perspective, this is kind of where we are now. You can see Crescent Lake. And if we kind of tilt the map and overlay it, you can see just how much land he was given. It was a massive amount of land, but look at Lake Crescent,
They roll.
Lake Roll.
Huh.
I wonder what they called it now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was actually named Lake Roll before it was Lake Dunn or Dunn's Lake. His plan for a perfect utopia did not follow through, obviously. He planned it down to, he was one of those people who had planned his farm, but never touched a blade of grass. And so he worked on this principle of like, well, if a tomato plant takes up, you know, a 2-foot circle and I can plant them 2 feet apart, and then I can have 15 tomatoes on each plant. And he figured out his crops perfectly on paper down to just the most granular detail of everything he wanted to grow, everything he wanted to get, and exactly how much money he was going to be able to get out of this, without ever having really farmed himself and understood things like crop loss and bugs and things, you know.
And
of
the
this.
climate, like he was trying to grow stuff that really wasn't appropriate.
Yeah, he was determined. Oh, I have an arrow pointing, but hey. So somebody in here should already know this one. It's half a mile long with half a score of scattered houses on it built of brown logs. The streets are laid out at right angles. One of them is 100-foot broad, the other 60. The laid back is all pine and scrub oaks. The bluff continues half a mile down the river, which is 7 fathoms deep near the town. But toward the opposite shore, there is a sandbar. It is not half a mile wide here, but soon widens above. That's William Bertram. He passed through here in 1765, and he documented how. One thing he also documented in the area, which I would love to dump in the ground over, is that he talks about there being the remains of a Spanish entrenchment, 12 yards one way and 14 the other, about 5 feet high. And I know there's still some remains out there, and I'm just like, so we have contemporary descriptions of it. So originally he arrived with 200 indentured servants. I'm trying to get this right to see because I'm used to be able to see my screen. Oh, look at me. I'm so smart. This is why I have a degree. So Mr. Rolls, who came over full of grievances against your excellency, Governor Grant, but never had the courage to speak either to a minister or to the Board of Trade, goes back in a few weeks, and all his grievances with him, unheard. He brings with him a valuable colony of 60 people consisting of shoeblacks, chimney sweepers, stake boys, tinkers and tailors, bunters, cinder wenches, whores, and pickpockets. Joyful sight this will be for your excellency to see this Berdilio senator arrive with such a valuable acquisition for your government. He carries also over with him presents for the Indians in the amount of 50 shillings. He has had such a disadvantageous opinion of St. Augustine that he won't bring his people to it for fear of their morals being debauched. That was King William's work to Governor Grant. I think a slight bit of sarcasm, maybe a little bit of specific in his words.
Stork is the guy that barks on travel.
Yes.
I think that.
Not the most flattering. I love that letter.
John barks on travel.
And the Brit, I can never say it right. Britfield, it's basically Anglophile, somebody who's a fanboy of England. But so yeah, all of, we might talk about how that 1999 paper paints him in an unflattering light, but his contemporaries did paint him much more favorably. So what happened with Rollstown? After they left, which, as you said, they left, he returned with 80 useless and expensive settlers, according to Governor Grant, great opinion of the people. He imported 1,000 cattle from Georgia. But this worked well until a dishonest overseer sold the herd and pickpocketed the proceeds, according to Rolls.
Yeah, because Welsh was back in England at the time. And
So what actually happened was Rolls refused to pay any of his bills and expenses, so the overseer sold off all of the assets for the thing to pay off the stuff. And basically that amounted to about 1,000 pounds, which adjusted for inflation is about 165,000 today, or about $190,000 to $200,000 for everything that he owned. So whoops on that one.
Yeah.
He then imported another herd, but they were all stolen or killed off while being driven from Georgia. The best luck, this guy should have bought a lottery ticket. Despite all this, he came back in 1779, he had a new plan. He realized that the white indentured servants were the reason that they failed, because who could expect them to work like that? So he came back with 150 enslaved Africans, realized that wasn't enough, he came back with 50 more. So in the end, he had more than 200 indentured servants, more than 200 enslaved Africans that were purchased, more than 1,000 acres. I know it was a giant, crazy number, 60,000 acres. But only about 600 acres were ever actually developed. And so what was he doing? Basically, he was farming. He was trying to memorize that he had everything kind of granular out. It was livestock, cattle, hogs, sheep. Not the best stock to have in Florida. Food, oranges, rice, and corn. Naval stores, lumber, tar, and turpentine, and then cash crops, indigo, wine, grapes, and cotton. Anybody try to grow wine grapes in Florida? It does not work. It really doesn't. Yeah, the turpentine would have worked good. Indigo was good. Indigo was a big cash crop even in St. Augustine, so we know that worked really well. Cotton was getting a little difficult at this time. It was still a really big crop, but there was a whole thing about regular cotton and Sea Island cotton, and they were trying to get better at spinning cotton through machinery. They were starting to try to do like spinning jennies and stuff. And the issue with that was that the Sea Island cotton, which is what they, if you're familiar with Kingsley Plantation, fiber art nerd, sorry, they grew Sea Island cotton, which is amazing. It's like cotton silk. The problem is that the staple, the length of the fiber is really long. Cotton is about 1.5 inches. Sea Island cotton is 3 to 5 inches. When they these big jennies, it would get gummed up in the machine. That is why it is illegal to grow Sea Island cotton on the mainland in Florida or in America at all. So they were starting at this point to get some of they were afraid, the worry is that if any of the Sea Island cotton cross-pollinates with regular cotton, it will damage the cotton crops. And so as they got better machines, they realized that Sea Island cotton wasn't very great for putting on these machines. So even that wasn't doing super great at the time. Now we get to the fun maps.
Yeah.
The Spanish maps. Yeah, Florida put on some weight.
Yeah.
So here we are, you can still see it, you know, there we are. Do I not have it? There we are. Clicking. So there we are, that's us. There's no name at this point. This map, I love this map.
Oh, wow. Just slice up Florida in little pieces.
Well, they assumed it was just waterways all the way through. While there are a lot, yeah, they basically made it a bunch of islands. And so this is our area. I invite you to guess where you think we might be. I have no idea. It gets a little wild. And so this,
I
what's,
would think Mount Royal would be.
well, I was gonna say, I have another map, and I don't think I put it in here. There's a map that was done, so this is 1760, they have a 1749, this is a British map.
Oh, yeah.
So you see Gulf of Mexico in English. I have a map from 1749, I thought I put it in here, but I guess I didn't. And it's done by the Spanish, and it's actually much better. The river is a river and not a bunch of weird islands. But so yeah, you can see it gets really, really strange. And then this is the Spanish map from 57. Maybe I did put it in here.
Wow.
And you know what? Not terrible. You know, not terrible. It's but I want you to look at this. This is Tampa. And probably Tequesta, but a different pronunciation. This is not the city of Tampa. This is actually naming tribes that are in the area. So a lot of these older Spanish maps, you know, Spanish didn't do too much in much of cities. They kind of went, put a thing there, and then build a road between them. So there aren't a ton of cities. A lot of the areas were named after the tribes that were there, and they have persisted to this day. And so I have Saturia, and as northerly as that is, that's actually should be around the Jacksonville area. It's a little weird up there. St. John's is not on there at all, but that is where Saturia was in the Jacksonville area. And Saturia was, and we're going into the Native Americans. So we're waiting for the Europeans. This is contact era stuff. You've seen these pictures before by any chance? These are fascinating images. They are done by Debris, DEBRY, although the original were done by Jacques Lemoyne. The Lemoyne drawings are mostly lost, and we don't know how closely Debris was to, basically he saw them and copied them, and we don't know how well he saw them. The images are fascinating. I love to see them. They do show things that are probably accurate, like the tattoos are gorgeous. You can see them all over the body. But some of the things like the women having long flowing hair and wearing skirts made of Spanish moss are probably not accurate. So you kind of get this sort of, kind of pick out the fantasy from the reality, because you have to remember, Debris, as far as I know, did not see these people. Most of these guys are drawn being like 6.5 feet tall. Or the Spanish people are how small they were. They weren't 6 feet tall, but they also weren't 4. They were 5'5", 5'7". They weren't, so they show these guys are full head tall. So Santoria was the name of the Timucua group that was in this area. And the Mocama subgroup, that was their language, present day Jacksonville. So you can see Mocama up there, a little north of Jacksonville, actually. But that yellow is all Timucua, and they extend pretty far down. So before the Europeans arrived, that was the natives that were here. And so there we are right there. And we have more of these images. Some of them are pretty interesting. This is, I think, one of the most contentious images that people talk about, and it is them presenting, you can see how tall he is, presenting this coquina column to the French. I don't know how, it's kind of a folk. I think people are still looking for this coquina column. People said they found it, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. We don't know what's true or not. I think the best way to look at these is to look at what they're seeing as far as clothing, as far as artifacts, and the stories, some part are probably fantasy. There are some interesting ones. So this is 3 of the local chiefs walking and kind of surveying the troops. A dugout canoe in their houses. We're pretty sure we found, archaeologically, we find these canoes and these houses. If any of you've been to Fountain of St. Augustine, I highly recommend it. They have really interesting reproductions of the houses, both the Spanish and the Native American ones that were done, that were found archaeologically in the ground. Smoking fish, this is a great thing. This is probably something they did in this area as well. Most of these, like I said, are Jacksonville, St. Augustine area, but I have no doubt that they had a very similar lifestyle on the river as they did on the coast. I love this one. Yeah, I don't know how true that is, but I find it hilarious. This is how you want to plug it. If I'm going to get a tree down there. Yeah, this is one of those old Lemoyne drawings. It's just like, okay, bud. There's your 45-foot long alligator. Which I don't think they can bend like that either. They're not quite that flexible. So archaeologically, what do we have of them? I will spare you the minutia. I'm not pulling out post holes as much as I wanted to. All right. I was going to show you, like, this is a 3-inch post hole with a although it's interesting archaeologically, we can't actually tell the difference between Spanish and Native American post holes, because the Native American post holes, when they made a post and stuck it in the ground, it's usually pointed at the bottom, and the European ones are flat. Because the Native Americans were used to digging in sand, and you need to have the point. So archaeologically, mostly what we find is their pottery. If any of you live in an area where there's a lot of erosion around here, especially on the riverbanks, you probably similar to this. It's a St. John's check stamp. That's what we call it archaeologically. And this dates to, up to around 500 years ago, they were making this. We find this even in Spanish context in the area because they were trading with the locals here. The vessels were usually wider, shallow vessels. They're all sand tempered. They feel very chalky. So when you pick up this stuff that you find in the river, it's brown and black or gray. It might be unevenly scorched black, and it feels very chalky if it's dry. That's usually this. It can be plain. Most common is this check stamp, and they had a wooden paddle that they carved the design in and just rolled it across it to make these designs.
Always thought it's fishing.
They have a basket. There's a basket weave one where they impress baskets that are into it.
It's like big mud or something that they, how do they?
Yeah, so whenever you see these really, really gorgeous Native American potteries or like effigies with like a bird's head on it, and they're painted and stuff, that's west of here, because they have clay in the soil. A lot of this stuff comes from the St. John's and east of the St. John's. It comes from the St. John's and east of it, and it's sand tempered, and we don't really have a lot of that really nice clay. So we don't get that gorgeous, you know, crisp design work that we get unless it's a trade item. They traded it, you know. And the local stuff, it has a very simple look because they didn't have people. The remarks that upset me, or people go, well, they were just such simple people. No, they were not. They just worked with what they had. They didn't have access to that. A lot of the stuff they make is absolutely gorgeous, considering they're making it with really nasty materials.
Is that when they fired, their pottery fired?
That is a debate we're still working on. We know it was fired. So what they did was, I forgot my word. It's
Baked it in the sun.
no, it's a kiln. There's a special name for it. They think what they did was they buried it in the ground. They dug a hole and they stacked them. They would make a whole bunch of them and stack them, cover them with dirt and fire them inside of it. And you would get a lot of breakage. You would also get them that survived as well. And they're still doing what's called experimental archaeology, where they try to figure out how they did it by redoing it themselves. When you hear about them, like we tried to make a winch to build Stonehenge with, that's experimental archaeology. So they're trying to figure out exactly what the kiln would have looked like, as far as I know. And it's been about 6-7 years since I've been deep in the archaeology field. I still don't think they've ever actually found a kiln. So I don't know that they ever actually had, you know, a lot of things we have good concrete evidence for. When they build wattle and daub structures, we have the daub pits where they were mixing the sand and clay to make daub housing. Actually found a kiln, as far as I know. They were definitely fired because you could usually see the firing marks, and they probably wouldn't have survived cooking if they weren't fired to some degree, because they did cook in these. And like I said, when you look at them, it's not super, but you can see how dark this is on the sides. That's probably scorch marks. They usually have dark scorch marks on these. So you'll see that. This one you can definitely see the scorch marks on. And this is another St. John's check stamp up top. The bottom one is what's called incising, where they just took something of 9/10 out of 10, some kind of bone or shell, and just incised lines on it. This is also the same kind of era. And okay, this is off the Waha incising. You see this has a little bit more clay in it. And it's probably, I don't know this particular piece, but it's probably been, you know, really hard weathered, so you don't see it, but the designs are usually a lot crisper in these. This is some of the oldest stuff we find. This is what we call the archaic, the orange period, because the pottery is orange. Hate to say it, it's one of my least favorite potteries. So whenever you make pottery, you have to temper it with something. Most of these are tempered with sand. This is fiber tempered. It's usually tempered with moss. The moss burns away, and the firing allows for the expansion so it doesn't break, and it leaves these little spicules, all these little wormholes in it that are from the moss that burned away. There's even some examples of hair and fur being used as a temper in it. And this is quite old. So this goes up to about 500 or 600 years ago, all the way back to like 3,000 years ago. And is that all? I have some more stuff. Yeah, okay, there we go. So this arch temper, it's actually got some incisions on it, so you can see where they've made designs into it.
Did they just make the designs so that it looks?
Probably just for beauty, yeah.
They knew that was mine and that's yours.
Probably, I mean, it's hard to tell. We know that they had art. You know, they could have just done it for the beauty of it, most likely. It could have been an ownership thing. Unfortunately, this being pre-contact and them being an oral tradition only with no written records, it's hard to know, you know. I wouldn't be surprised if it was like, yes, this mark belongs to this family or whatever, but as far as we know, it's just for beauty, for aesthetics. This one is incised and punctated, so you can see they got the punctated or the little poke marks. Archaeologists are very, very descriptive. Yeah, literally punctated. So just a quick jump over archaeology, the kind of stuff we have. We all know Mount Royal. So Mount Royal is an interesting site. I've been asked before why they just installed a staircase in the middle of it, like wouldn't that wreck it? One of the reasons they did that is because, that did it? I think it was Goggin. The archaeologists who excavated it, they typically just went in with a crew of people and just bulldozed a chunk right out of the middle of these, and that's how they investigated them. And so they put the staircase, you know, rather than dig another thing out of it. It had already been pretty much destroyed. So they did find some burials out there. I know a lot of interesting artifacts. These mounds are different wherever you go. Sometimes I would say 90% of the time, they're trash piles. This is just where they piled their trash over the years. But sometimes they are involving burials in them. We've seen burials of animals and pets. I know there was a pet dog in St. Augustine that found a few that was actually found out there. There's human burials as well, obviously. And so this is another one. Hey, Bartram. 50 yards from the landing place stands a magnificent Indian mound. About 15 years ago, I visited this place, at which time there were no settlements of white people, but all appeared wild and savage. Yet in that uncultivated state, it possessed an almost inexpressible extent of old fields. Round about the mount, there was also a large orange grove, together with palms and live oaks extending from the mount along the banks, downwards of which has been cleared away to make room for a planting ground. What greatly contributed towards completing the magnificence of the scene was a noble Indian highway, which led from the great mount on a straight line, first through a point or wing of the orange grove, and continuing thence through an awful forest of live oaks. It was terminated by palms and laurel magnolias on the verge of an oblong artificial lake, which is on the edge of an extensive green level savanna. This grand highway was about 50 yards wide, a little below the common level, and the earth thrown up on each side, making a bank of about 2 feet high. And I was to point out that awful back in that day meant instilled you full of awe.
Yeah.
It didn't mean it was terrible, horrifying trees. What? No, it's full of awe. It's awe-inspiring. It's one of the things I really love about Bartram. I know some things I take it with a grain of salt. A lot of it's true, but he does give really vivid descriptions of these things that we would never have anything like this otherwise. We do know that the natives of this time and this place did plant extensive fields. In fact, I think Tallahassee actually means old fields, or something like that. So people tend to think, when we think of Native Americans, they're always thinking about the ones that are traveling nomads out west. The ones here, they did travel seasonally. We know they inhabited certain camps certain times of the year, following things like deer and fowl and stuff as they went to and from the coast. But they were also very proficient in farming, you know, beans, corn, squash, maize. So very, very advanced. They knew their land. This is two of the most famous artifacts found are copper plates. And more than likely, they were something like this round thing you see on his chest. So it's kind of gorgeous that he's wearing.
It's a US UFO.
Yeah.
Same with aliens. Yeah. So, so yeah, very likely it was one of these kind of decorative places they had.
Square like that? That's-
Yeah, these were square and they were found with burials.
Where are they now?
Not in
The
South
one
Florida,
on the right is
Pardon me?
in New York City.
New York City. I know one of them, let's put the one left in is, I want to say it's South Florida, but I don't think it is. South Florida or West Florida University, one of those two, I think. Yeah, oh, I put in arrows and I forgot I put them in. I think that's it for me. Yes, that's it for me. Short and sweet. So, questions, anything or contests?
How many other copper plates have been recovered in Florida?
I couldn't count, but it hasn't been many. It couldn't be, I mean, I would surprised it was 6 or 7 or less. They're a very rare item. Like we saw them in these, most of them, they're most famous for the shell ones that are made out of like the backside of a conch or a whelk. Well, I guess a conch as well, but you know, thinking of lightning bolts, but and they would kind of be like a flattish cup thing. That was the most common. The copper ones, we didn't really do a lot of copper around here, and a lot of it was, you know, trade metals and things like that. So they would have been extremely rare commodity.
Where would it have come from?
Europeans probably, or they could have traded it. I mean, it wouldn't have been coming down, you know, people came from it, they'd have traded as far as like the Carolinas, and then, you know, they did have trade routes.
The design there, the UFO design there, is one that came from the Midwest, and they attribute it to the Mississippi.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, they did trade this stuff far and wide. It doesn't necessarily mean it had to have come from a European, you know, they had massive trade networks that spanned the country.
Yeah, even down into the Yucatec's obsidian points have been found here.
Yeah.
Where did they get the orange trees?
Oh, that would have been left by the Spanish.
The Spanish or the Friars?
Pigs, chickens, horses, cows, and citrus were all brought by the Spanish.
Bees.
Oh, yeah, other fun things like that.
Yeah.
You also briefly mentioned about Spanish entrenchments at Rollstown.
Mhm.
Do they, that where Florida Power and Light is now?
Well,
I believe that they did excavations on them. I don't know if they're still intact or not, but I know they've been documented.
I was just
Well,
curious.
yeah, yeah, a lot of the times, I mean, especially back in the 40s and 50s, there was a big thing of let's get it out of the ground. Archaeology has moved forward a lot since the 20s and even the 1800s, where it was about what shiny thing can we put in a museum. It was getting better in the 40s and 50s, but it was still more focused on what you could pull out of the ground than what was in the ground. So ripping through that to pull out stuff would not have been a huge, they would have documented it better, but they still would have destroyed it.
Are there any photographs?
Likely, no, probably, because I know they still have the quartermaster site file and we're doing, you know, archaeological, like they have a repository of all that kind of stuff that happened, so for the state.
But you gotta remember San Mateo, I mean,
That's one of the mission sites, yeah, on the roads.
Are you
They
familiar
were
with,
here.
everybody familiar with Turtle Mound? You know, south of this one.
right.
It seemed to me, I have a vague recollection of reading a sign there that said those people seasonally migrated between there and Mount Royal.
Probably, yeah,
Makes
they would
sense.
have
There
these,
was a sign to that effect.
yeah, it was very common, we can see it archaeologically in the deposits
I
where,
think when they go, where they're going in the winter, where in the summer.
because they're not migrating like the Midwest where they migrate over 100 miles or 200 miles, 5,000 miles. They just kind of move back and forth with the seasons. We can see it archaeologically, we can see where they've inhabited an area. And there's a living ground there, and then there's just a layer of detritus where it's been abandoned for 6 months or 9 months, and then they come back to it, so we can see these layers.
Well, isn't that what the Europeans did in medieval times? They, because, you know, there was no sanitation. They would live in their castles and put the detritus and then they would leave.
Yeah, when it got so filled that you couldn't live there anymore, you just move 100 feet that way. And it's fine.
But, so do you have any idea of what, I mean, did they go to the coast for the mosquito-y summer and then go inland in the winter?
I don't know the answer to that. I would imagine somebody knows it if they did some kind of pollen analysis. You can do pollen analysis on the finds and see seasonally what time they would have been there. I don't know where the answer myself, but it's something that they would be able to tell. So there might be a paper floating around out there with the answer. I usually tell people I can either give you an answer or make something up entertaining. Whatever. Sure. But no, there probably is an answer to that because you could tell from pollen deposits, but I don't know it. Yeah. I'm free.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, awesome.
Thank you.